Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean. Today I'm doing 24 books to read in 2024. Now, in 2023 I had a pretty bad reading year and I only finished I think 3 of 23 books. This year I am setting a goal. I want to DNF, do not finish, no more than 1 book on this list. So I am giving myself 1 DNF. Otherwise, I am going to try to force myself to read every book on this list. So since I like symmetry, since there are 24 books on this list, I am grouping them 6 2-star books, 6 3-star books, 6 4-star books, and 6 5-star books. So let's go. First, for projected 2-star books, so these are books I really do not expect to like very much. I expect they'll just be, at best, just okay. First, my least anticipated book is Spartina by John Kesey. This is off the top 1000 list, 1000 Books to Read Before You Die by James Mustich. Do not know anything about this book whatsoever. Next, also off the top 1000 list, is Justine by Lawrence Durrell. Do not know anything about it. Then we go into Betty McDonald, Anybody Can Do Anything, another top 1000 book. This one I'm a little bit hopeful for because there is a signed book by her at the bookstore for $100. So I want to read this first and see if I like it at all before getting the signed book. Because I don't really want to just take a chance and buy a $100 signed book by an author I may not even like. So kind of high hopes for this one. If I really like it, I'll get the signed book by her. The last 3 books on the projected 2-star rankings are just sci-fi books because I am not into sci-fi or fantasy. So there's Isaac Asimov, Foundation, top 1000 book. Then there is Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, top 1000 book. And then finally, Dune by Frank Herbert, top 1000 book. Moving on to the projected 3-star rankings. So these are books that I think I might possibly recommend to people, but still definitely not be my favorite books in the world. Beginning with top 1000 book, Hilary Mantel, A Place of Greater Safety. Do not know anything about it. Next top 1000 book is Alan Bennett, The Uncommon Reader. The owner of the bookstore said this is a pretty funny book. This next one is not a top 1000 book, but the bookstore owner was highly recommending this book, The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski. And what he said about this one is it's a book about the Holocaust without mentioning Jews or Nazis, which is real interesting. Now, I did a little bit of research on this book, and something I definitely do not like is, first off, the author was like, when he was about to publish this, he was telling everyone it was autobiographical, his story about his escape from Nazi Germany. And then just as it was about to be published, he said, no, that's actually not true. But then later on, he came under a lot of accusations of plagiarism. So there's like lots of accusations that this book isn't even his at all. And he just like slapped his name to it and published it. So I will not read this as a Jerzy Kosinski book. I am just reading it basically as The Painted Bird by essentially unknown author, or Jerzy Kosinski with an asterisk behind it, or beside it. This may not be his work at all, but the bookstore owner said this was a phenomenal book. Next on the projected 3-star ratings is R.F. Kuang, Babel. So of course this has been all over BookTube, but I have not read it yet. I do not read many books that are like current fiction. So I'm real curious to give it a read and see if I think it's worth the hype it's gotten, or if it's overrated trash. So I'm really not expecting to like it. Next off the top 1000 list is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. I think there may be a couple books by Joseph Conrad on the top 1000 list. Finally, for the 3-star books is Pat Barker, Regeneration. So this is the first book in a trilogy. I think it's a World War I based trilogy. And Pat Barker by a female Pat. So real curious to give it a read. The whole trilogy is on the top 1000 list, and I have book 2 and 3 already. So curious to give it a read. Okay, so now for the projected 4-star books. So these are books that I expect I will like pretty well, but they may not be like flawless masterpieces. They may not be the best books ever written, but still, all in all, very good books. First, top 1000 book, and the bookstore owner really touted this book. The Tin Drum by Gunter Grass. Do not know anything about it, except the bookstore owner said this is a book about like a kid who doesn't like the world, so he decides to stop growing. So curious. Next, this is an author who is on the top 1000 list for her book Offshore, but this is the book the bookstore owner really recommended. The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. And he said it's a real shame that a lot of people don't read Penelope Fitzgerald because she is a very good author, he said. And in case you're wondering, no, Penelope Fitzgerald is not the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald. His wife was named Zelda. So different writer altogether, different person altogether. Next, this one probably would have been a projected 5-star rating, but I tried reading another book by this author in 2023, and I really didn't like it. It was a major disappointment. But I want to read every book by this author still, and this is one I have, and it's also a signed copy, which is real neat. Not a top 1000 book, but it is Cloudsplitter by Russell Banks, a real big book. Banks is on the top 1000 list for the book The Sweet Hereafter, which I thought was a beautiful, perfect book. I absolutely love that book. So that book, The Sweet Hereafter, made me want to go out and buy and read every book by Russell Banks. So beautiful book, The Sweet Hereafter. Cannot recommend it strongly enough. The book I tried to read last year was Affliction, signed copy of that book. I didn't like that at all. So this is my third book attempt at a Russell Banks, Cloudsplitter. Real big book. We'll see how it goes. I'm kind of a little bit pessimistic after Affliction. So we'll see. Next, this one is science fiction fantasy, so not my genre at all, but I kind of want to read this author, and mainly for his book Starship Troopers. But it is Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert A. Heinlein. So curious to give it a read. I know I'm not a fan of science fiction fantasy at all, but I'm just kind of hoping that maybe I'll like this author. I don't really know why, just because I guess I like the film Starship Troopers, but I did read that like the director of that movie, I forget his name, I think it's like Paul Verhoeven or something, the same guy who made RoboCop. I think he said he was trying to read that book Starship Troopers and just got like bored halfway through, so he decided to just remake the movie however he saw fit, which I thought is pretty hilarious. So I don't know, we'll see, but I don't know anything about this book otherwise, but I'm kind of hopeful that I'll like it. And this book is on the top 1000 list. Next, I kind of have one of this author's books on my like to read list every year because he's kind of quietly one of my favorite writers, but it is Greene, Brighton Rock. Actually, right now I'm currently reading another book by him, Stamboul Train, or it was also retitled Orient Express. So I'm reading that right now. That was like his second book he published, kind of. Actually, he wrote 2 other books between then, after his first book, but he repudiated them, meaning he like didn't allow them to get reprinted or anything. So Orient Express or Stamboul Train is kind of like his second widely available book after The Man Within, which I read and I thought it was okay. So reading Stamboul Train now, and then I think Brighton Rock is his next book, like in his bibliography, like his next book he published chronologically that I actually have a copy of. The reason I have this book on this list instead of Orient Express is because reading a lot of reviews of Graham Greene books, like consistently, people say Brighton Rock is either one of their favorites or their favorite book by Graham Greene. So real hopeful about it. But this book is actually not on the top 1000 list. There are 3 books on the top 1000 list by Graham Greene. And I think I've read just one of them already, which was The Power and the Glory. But Brighton Rock, one of like the fan favorite books, is not on the top 1000 list. But anyway, this is a book I plan to read later this year, and I've liked most every Graham Greene book that I've read, so hopeful for it. Last on the projected 4-star ratings is Michael Crichton, The Terminal Man. So I think this was his second book published by his own name. Previously he wrote under a pen name, but then he started using his own name. I think the first book he published with his own name was The Andromeda Strain, which I didn't really like too much. Michael Crichton is really a hit or miss author for me. So I've liked really around half of the books he's published, but the others I didn't really like so much. So we'll see how it goes. I do kind of think I like some of his older stuff a little bit more because he was a little bit more of a thriller writer when he was like younger or whatever. So he just had, I think, better pacing with his chapters and stuff. Like he had more cliffhangers and stuff, and he had better tension, and he kept things flowing. But as he kind of developed, he kind of started throwing a lot more like techno stuff into it. And I don't know, just some of the books didn't really work for me, but I definitely kind of like some of his earlier writing. So we'll see how it goes. Last, for projected 5-star ratings, so these are books I expect to absolutely love and think the world of. Here we go. So with like the least anticipated of those books is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. The thing with this one is I've heard like a lot of people actually really praise this book, so that kind of creates a lot of expectations. It is a top 1000 book, of course. And I read somewhere that it has like one of the best opening lines like ever, and so I read that opening line and I didn't really think it was anything special. So I don't know, and it's kind of a little bit of a long book, so we'll see how it goes. I'm kind of a little bit pessimistic in a way, like just Rebecca, I don't really care about that, but so many people have said this is a good book, so I'm kind of hoping they're right, and so I'm projecting it as a 5-star read. Next, I previously, several years ago, like maybe almost 5 years ago, began reading this book from the library, and I think I only read like 30 or 40 pages and then I had to return it. But my recollection of it was that the author was pretty good, so that's why I did not DNF the book after 40 pages. I thought, yeah, I'll probably pick this book up again at some point, but I never have. But it is on the top 1000 list, and I remember liking it pretty well, and I know a lot of people have said this is a real good author or a real good book, so I'm hopeful for it. So that book is Beloved by Toni Morrison. I do not remember anything about it, even though I was like somewhere, 30, 40, maybe even like 75 pages into it, but I don't remember a thing about it. So I just plan to start this book all over again and see how it goes. So this next book is off the top 1000 list, and I didn't really think of anything when I got it because it's just I've never heard of this book or author before. But then like in the weeks that followed, I noticed like several people would come to the bookstore and they would ask about this author. And I've had some conversations with customers who like were looking for this author, and just they really like this author. So that kind of boosts my anticipation a bit. But the book is The Warden by Anthony Trollope, a top 1000 book. I'm kind of hopeful for it just because a lot of people have came to the store looking for this author. Next, this was almost going to be my second most anticipated read, but I think it is my third most anticipated read. But it is Ken Kesey, Sometimes a Great Notion. So this was his second novel. His first novel was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I read, I think 2 years ago, and I really liked it. Not a top 1000 book. I read that book because my dad had a copy of it, so I just thought, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, why not? I'll give it a try. I remember seeing the movie like years and years and years back. And I really liked it. And while I was reading that book, I saw a signed Ken Kesey book at the bookstore, just right over here in this corner, Sailor Song. So I got that book. I was really excited to have a signed book by the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Not a top 1000 author. But anyway, after finishing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I kind of decided I want to read everything by Ken Kesey. So this is the second book he published, Sometimes a Great Notion. So I plan to read this next, and I'm really hopeful for it. I don't know why, but I just kind of hope that Ken Kesey will be one of my favorite writers. Next, this is an author who I've seen his books at the bookstore for really a couple years now, but I haven't gotten them because he is not on the top 1000 list. But it is World's End by T.C. Boyle. And the main reason I've always been tempted to like get one of his books is because that name just sounds so familiar to me, T.C. Boyle, but I didn't know like where I may have heard of him from. And I'd like look at his bibliography and none of the books like sounded familiar to me. But anyway, I was like putting one of his books on the shelf or something like that. And I saw on the cover it said by the author of World's End. And then I looked, and the book next to the book where I was putting it in the shelf was World's End with a sign sticker. So I kind of figured, oh, well, I guess since it says by the author of World's End, this must be a pretty prominent book. And so I looked it up on Wikipedia, and sure enough, it said T.C. Boyle is most known for World's End. And then I took it up to the counter to buy it, and I asked the bookstore owner if he's read this book. And he said, yes, that is his best book. It's a masterpiece. So I'm really hopeful for it. I do not know anything about it whatsoever, but it's a signed book and it's supposed to be his best book. So real hopeful for it. Last, this is another author where like I have to put something by this author on my to-read list every year. And it is Going After Cassiano by Tim O'Brien. So, 2 years ago, I read The Things They Carried. I put it on one of my to-read lists for the year, and I think I'm like almost certain The Things They Carried was my favorite book of that year. It's kind of currently my second favorite book of all time, The Things They Carried. In fact, I am really tempted to put The Things They Carried as my number one book of all time, even over Walter Moore's The City of Dreaming Books, which I have right over here, because The Things They Carried was just so perfect and so beautiful. Perfect book. And then after that, I read another Tim O'Brien book that I have a signed copy of, In the Lake of the Woods. I also thought that was a masterpiece. After reading that, I read another signed book I have by him up there or somewhere, July. But I did not like that book. That was the first Tim O'Brien book I did not like. And then this last year, 2023, I read If I Die in a Combat Zone, Box Me Up and Ship Me Home, which was the first book he published, his memoirs. And even though I didn't like it as much as The Things They Carried, I still thought it was definitely a good book with some very good chapters. So that kind of redeemed Tim O'Brien in my view. So, Tim O'Brien is most known for two books, The Things They Carried and Going After Cassiano. And the bookstore owner, he is like a big time Going After Cassiano fan. In fact, he served in the Vietnam War. And in fact, he met Tim O'Brien on at least one occasion, I think at a book signing or something. And they talked about their like time in Vietnam together. And anyway, so the bookstore owner like swears by this book. He says this is the best book on the Vietnam War, Going After Cassiano. So that is such high praise, and I love Tim O'Brien, his books, The Things They Carried and In the Lake of the Woods. Beautiful, perfect, masterpiece, genius books. And what's real cool about this one is I actually have a signed copy of this book somewhere. Oh, it's right here. So, Going After Cassiano. Let's see if I could get it. Signed by Tim O'Brien. So, of course, I'm going to read the paperback version. I had actually previously bought this book before I found the signed book by him at the bookstore. So I'm going to read the unsigned one, so that way it doesn't matter if I damage it or whatever, and keep the signed one just as a collectible. So this is definitely one of my more treasured signed books, because just the bookstore owner says this is such a phenomenal book. It's his favorite book on the Vietnam War, and I love the author, Tim O'Brien, so real glad to have that. And as a result, Going After Cassiano is my #1 most anticipated read for 2024. I better not dislike this book. Anyway, that is it for my 24 books to read in 2024. So, have you guys read any of these books? What are some books you plan to read for this year? So, thank you guys for watching. See you next time. Bye.